Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast which asks which movies are well worth watching and remembering for all time. Every episode we discuss a different piece of film history to decide if it should make its way into our movie vault. Filled with questions, trivia and crazy challenges, it's the perfect way to deep dive into a myriad of movies. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a glimpse of what to expect in today's episode.
No, he genuinely said
this.
this.
Oh my god.
Is Sylvester Stallone real? What?
Poetry by Stallone.
Right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? Great Scott! I'll be back. Here's Johnny. Oh, hi, Mark.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman. It's not the boss. It's a silly I'll get you, my pretty.
To infinity and beyond.
You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that asks which movies are well worth watching and deserve to be remembered for all time. I'm your host, David Osger, and I'm joined by someone still doing time for the crimes he committed last time, because he broke the law. It's Craig McDonald. Hello, Craig.
All right, I'll bite. What the hell did I do last time?
I just said you were a criminal because we were talking about Rush Hour.
Yeah, but...
It's a mystery crime at this stage. That's the story of this year's podcast.
You are making this so hard for me to advertise as a podcast, because the more and more in which you go, like, down this line of I'm a criminal, the less likely I am to want to share it out. It's going to get to, like, episode 5 of this year, and it's like, he killed a man.
Craig, like, sues me for, like, libel or defamation or something.
I mean, there's enough evidence, right? Like, remind me, which sort of, like, awful Mr. Man character did you compare me to before?
Oh, Mr. Snooty?
Yeah, Mr. Like, what the hell?
We'll just leave that there. There's no context as to why there was comparisons to Mr. Men.
Yeah,
go find
whatever.
out. Right, so over to those who are joining us this week anyway to discuss this week's film. So first up, the film we are discussing this week is all about like 80s, 90s action. So we had to call our good friend, actor Christopher Maxwell. Hello, Chris.
Hello.
Hello, boys. How you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I was really excited when I got to watch this one again. It's been a long time since I watched this one, so it was nice to go back and see it through a much older lens, because I believe the last time I saw this, I was definitely still in high school. So
okay.
It was a lot of years, a lot of change, and I think, as we'll probably discuss as it goes along, that might affect one's perspective on this movie. It might not, but no, I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Good tease there. And usually when we have previous guests on, we like to talk about like when they were last on or previous episodes. And I think, Chris, actually, you like maybe for me, because this is sometimes some of the most fun we have because we're talking about these ludicrous films. But I think you've got a pretty good like backtrack of like films in terms of like the ones you joined us for. This isn't including everything you joined us for, but we've talked about like classic horror like Creature of the Black Lagoon, Invisible Man, Volcano, Van Helsing, and Akira. Like that's a pretty good, build up to this film, I think, in some ways.
Oh yeah, that would be a hell of a day at the cinema.
Exactly. But on to our next guest. This is their first time appearing on the podcast. So it is video editor and reviewer Sarah Williams, aka Popcorn Chat. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me on, guys. This is so cool.
No problem. Yeah, we're happy to have you join us. Yeah, so Sarah, for the people at home, please do tell us, what is it you do? What do you sort of specialize in? And do you have any sort of like go-to movies that you sort of list as like your favorite films? How do you sort of navigate things like the cinema, watching films at home? Do you have any favorites?
Yeah, so I guess a little bit of context. By day, I'm a camera operator and editor. So I've always had that sort of film sort of production background. And then in my spare time, I watch films, I review them on my YouTube channel, and then I sort of promote them on Instagram, Twitter. So I'm very sort of active on like the social media, but YouTube's like my main sort of platform. So I guess in and around the job, I try and squeeze in a few cinema trips in the week. Obviously, using a lot of the on-demand services recently. But yeah, I try and absorb myself in film and TV as much as I can, and do reviews fairly regularly. Sometimes on new releases, sometimes throwing it back to some franchises that I love, or doing like lists and tiers of topics or directors that people love. So I'm always trying to mix it up in terms of the content that I make. And even do vlogs sometimes as well. I've been to a few Comic Cons, so I try and keep it fresh, I guess. Favourite genres, I do find myself falling a lot into sort of horror, so I think me and Chris would get on quite well in terms of the horror genre. And I obviously always like a little indie film, be it like an indie rom-com or something like that that's, you know, a little bit offbeat and sometimes like shows a bit more of a true depiction of emotions and relationships and things like that. So yeah, but I watch a ton, like a real range of genres, but those are my favourites.
Cool. So yeah, well, we can't wait to discuss today's film with you. So now we have like a sort of group question. So this is open to everyone. And considering the film that we're talking about today, I just wanted to ask people if they were to wake up in any era, like of time, when would it be? So obviously maybe thinking about like how this could make a good film or something like that, or something pulled from inspiration of film. Any that jump out to anyone? Chris?
I think when looking at that question, I was sort of thinking like, would this be, do I stay in this era permanently? Is this a case of where I once I'm plonked in this era, I've got a bunch of years to look forward to? Because if that were the case, I'd probably say right at the start of the 1970s, so I could then experience that cinema as it was happening. Let's say I've got a good 2 decades, maybe 3 decades. You know, I could relive the 90s again, but this time as an old cantankerous man. You know, that'd be quite fun. But yeah, I think I always love the idea of like what time you'd go to, what would you want to experience, and how like I would be perceived, because I'm assuming big, long-haired ginger man with a big beard. You put me in the 1950s, I'd be quite a sight for sore eyes.
Yeah, it's like whenever you see those pictures of like the now showing boards, isn't it, with like the lights, and it's something like Pulp Fiction or, you know, The Shining or something, and you're like, oh God, imagine seeing that like when it opened, especially in like those kind of like American style theaters, etc. That does sort of make you, you know, want to experience that with the audience.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. That's one of the only things I ever talk about with time travel is like, I'd love to go back and just watch this film when it came out. Because that, as much as like you think about the butterfly effect, am I going to affect so much if I just go to a cinema? Maybe I won't destroy the world.
Sarah, was there any ones that popped into your brain when you saw this?
See, I think I've gone a little bit rogue on this. I'm secretly a bit of a fan of a period drama, or like those sorts of films and literature and stuff. So I sort of was thinking more like the Georgian era. But again, like Chris, I'm going to have to like quickly like get in with the rich people. You know, I don't want to be at the bottom of the hierarchy. I want to be at the parties, dressed up and stuff. But again, I thought it'd be temporary. If I was living there the whole time, I don't think I could do it. But I just think it'd be interesting in terms of the costumes and the parties and the socialites of the Georgian era. I think it'd be quite nice.
That's quite funny with like time travel in a way, isn't it? It's just like, as long as I could be there for a few weeks, I don't mind. It's like, would people say that with traveling? You know, like, I'd love to go to Australia, but not for the entire year. You know, it's just like, is there a time period in which people will be like, yeah, I'd be happy to stay there the entire time? But no, I did kind of expect period pieces to show up in that way. I guess with this week's film, it's hard not to think of like the future and what it could be. You know, obviously we've only got the reference of what has happened. We can't predict the future, but I guess even if it was somewhat like this film, you'd be like, it'd be interesting to see and kind of navigate that.
There's definitely elements within this. I was like, this is a bit scary. Like, we're seeing some of this stuff now, like with some of the cars. I was like, oh gosh, that's a bit too close to home.
Yeah.
It was the cars was the big one for me, actually. I was like, okay, I think they've nailed this. Yeah. Of all the future scapes I've seen of movies, this might be the most accurate portrayal of cars, because every other one's got them flying.
That's true.
But this one's got them just driving. But this time it's like, we're still driving, but now we're self-driving.
They got like a video screen in there, like a call being like, this is so futuristic. Like, you're talking to somebody on a video call, we're driving. What the hell? You're like, yeah, that's just standard now.
Yeah, it's funny seeing their prediction of the future. You're like, oh, it's not not too dissimilar now, but at the time, I'm sure that was probably quite amazing.
I just find it pessimistic that their prediction for like 3 years ahead of their time was just, oh yeah, we have cryo-freezing technology and neuro-changing behavior technology.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about that, realizing like the immediate future that you see before that future is like, wow, what happened in 3 years? Oh my word.
It's a bit like the whole, soon we will have that moment of like Back to the Future where it's like you bypass what was meant to be the future, like in real life, which would be scary. So yeah, we can definitely compare like how accurate they got it at that moment. But yeah, we can't wait to chat all about today's movie later on. And yeah, we can't wait to hear from all of our listeners too, what they might think. So please remember to leave us a review, interact with us wherever you're listening, as well as on social media like Instagram and Twitter, where you can find us at Well Good Movies. It all really helps the podcast grow and means we can see what you guys want to hear and what you enjoy the most. So on with the show. Let's kick off things with today's Now Showing. So we've definitely alluded to this film already. So Craig, for those who didn't catch our last episode, or for those who just need a reminder, what is it that we are discussing and what led us here today?
So in our last episode, after looking at Rush Hour, we decided to take a look at various police duos in various films in our game Buddy Buddy Good Time. In the end, it was close, but Aaron was our victor, and Aaron chose from the various choices the 1993 sci-fi film Demolition Man.
Welcome to the emergency line of the San Angeles Police Department.
In the 21st century, violence is a thing of the past.
But I wouldn't give for some action.
Buckle up.
But the future...
I'm gonna love running this place.
...isn't what it used to be.
It's a brave new world. Sorry, you gotta go.
Sylvester Stallone, Wesley Snipes, Demolition Man. Look for it on video cassette.
Yep. Demolition Man. So we'll be talking all about that film and asking the question whether it deserves the honor of a place in our movie vault, our vault that encapsulates memorable movies for all time. So for those who don't know, a bit of information about the film. Demolition Man was released in 1993, like we've said. It stars Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes. It's directed by Marco Brambilla, written by Peter M. Lenkoy, who's credited with story, then Robert Renaud, who's also credited with story, and Daniel Waters, who's credited with just the screenplay. The soundtrack is by Elliot Goldenthal. The cinematography is by Alex Thompson, and it's edited by Stuart Bard. The plot summary is: frozen in 1996, Simon Phoenix, a convicted crime lord, is revived for a parole hearing well into the 21st century. Revived into a society free from crime, Phoenix resumes his murderous rampage, and no one can stop him. John Spartan, the police officer who captured Phoenix in 1996, has also been cryogenically frozen, this time for a crime he did not commit. In 2032, the former cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, and Santa Barbara have merged into peaceful, utopian San Angeles. Unable to stop him with their non-violent solutions, the police release Spartan to help recapture Phoenix. Now, after 36 years, Spartan has to adopt himself to the future society he has no knowledge about. So the film also stars Sandra Bullock, Nigel Hawthorne, Benjamin Bratt, Bob Gunton, Glenn Shadix, Dennis Leary, and Grand L. Bush.
Can I just quickly challenge that plot synopsis, wherever you read it from? He did commit that crime. He did recklessly kill like 20 to 30 hostages. Where the hell does this crime he did not commit bullshit come from? The guy was a renegade. He did do it, right? Let's not have any reservations about that. It's not like some innocent guy who's been thrust into this. He was a renegade. He did kill those people.
Actually, I was going to say Phoenix does say that they were already dead at one point.
Oh, does he?
You could miss it because honestly, it's during a scene later on in the film, and he just says, "Oh yeah, they were already dead," and it's like, oh, so he's exonerated.
Yeah, because I do remember there was that whole thing of like, where are the hostages? But yeah, interesting how we're already picking apart the plot, which is quite funny. But yeah, that is the way that it was described on IMDb. But that'll be the big question of the week. Was Spartan in the right? Let us know on social media. So yeah, quite a mix of sort of British and American stars in this. You got like an early role for Sandra Bullock, the classic kind of like English villain, similar to what we've had previously with Rush Hour, with people like Nigel Hawthorne. So, and then Dennis Leary, who I guess was like in his prime at this kind of moment. So yeah, this is definitely encapsulating that kind of era of Stallone, Schwarzenegger, who's even like name dropped in this movie. Even Jackie Chan again, who was in our previous film Rush Hour. So it's very much of that era of like the 80s and 90s Sylvester Stallone films. If you look at all of the like related films and the films that are coming out at that time, it really does make you realize how much of a thing this was at that time, because you look now and it's all, possibly fantasy, mainly superhero stuff, which take over the kind of popular space. But back then it was very much like science fiction and action heroes and all this kind of stuff. So, just looking at like related films, you got Total Recall, Judge Dredd, Tango and Cash, The Running Man, True Lies, RoboCop, Commando, The Last Action Hero. It's just so many of like the same type of film, and they're like, right, now this is the plot with this one. This is who's starring in this one. And similar to what we were talking about last time again with Jackie Chan, of having that like movie star with Stallone. So the first thing that stood out in my mind, and again, Chris, one of the reasons we asked you to join us for this one is, why do you think that this was such a big thing at this time? I guess the biggest one was probably Terminator. I don't know if everyone was kind of trying to replicate Terminator, but to you, why do you think that the 80s and 90s was such a big time for these big action men and these big explosive movies?
I think it has something to do with because particularly with like you mentioned it with those films. I think the key component of these films was the action hero. It was the big bill star. The difference between the films of that era versus the films of today is that you could argue it's the brand that sells. Obviously, you get big names attached to it, but very rarely is a film sold around your Schwarzenegger. Like you'll see probably a poster for Demolition Man, Stallone will be right there, top billing. And I think it was just the larger-than-life characters, these larger-than-life people in these larger-than-life scenarios. And one of the best parts about it is that when you put these characters in these scenarios, they tend to be like... they tend to fit so perfectly, and yet also they're an outlier, like John Spartan. He's like a renegade cop, but when you look at the state of Los Angeles in this world's 1996, you're thinking, well, he's actually probably pretty efficient for what you guys are dealing with, considering like the opening sequences, he's got his beret on and he's dropping down. Like, it's all, I think, just everyone was just trying to capture... everyone was trying to capture Arnie mania, really. Arnie and Stallone were the two big heavy hitters of that time. And, Terminator, Conan, Commando. I think everyone just wanted to repeat that success. It's the same in horror, really. Everyone wants to repeat the success of that one iconic horror character. Because once you get a character, you're onto something really big, and you can milk that for as long as possible.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it kind of evolved with those actors continue to show up, but they're, playing the characters that they originally did, especially with Schwarzenegger, returning in Terminator, etc. Or in the case of Stallone, I guess he kind of balances a bit more between drama with having things like Rocky, but also the fact that he kind of encapsulated this entire vibe of action heroes from the 80s and 90s by making the Expendables films. So literally being like, yeah, I'm just going to get all these guys together and we're just going to make this like mega blockbuster film. But again, like you said, there was kind of more of a franchise mentality at that stage rather than being like two people, these are the big, the face off against each other. I don't know if that would happen as much now unless it was a comic situation. And I think when you look at like movie stars, you get Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson possibly, but again, he appears in such a variety of different films. And while, yes, I do tend to categorize them as like The Rock films because they are quite similar in some ways. Another one that sort of sprung to my mind was Ryan Reynolds. That, he has very much become like, oh, Ryan Reynolds shtick. That is like, he makes a very like repetitive film after Deadpool mainly. Sarah, would you agree in terms like, do you think obviously now maybe the action hero explosive film isn't as big a thing, and maybe the movie stars are sort of different, maybe not so much gone?
Yeah, no, definitely. I don't know when it sort of changed necessarily, maybe in the 2000s, but yeah, that having that actor or character actor not sort of be in the limelight anymore. Like you say, it's definitely much more of a brand, be it Marvel, Star Wars, or whatever it is. People cling to that. It's the merchandise. It's that. Like, I'm sure there's some Arnie action figures somewhere, but you know what I mean? People are connecting to that universe, that world, that franchise. I don't know. Is it become more of a business? Is it more of that angle? I really don't know. It's a shame if it is. But yeah, I agree. Dwayne Johnson was the first one that came to mind in terms of like a modern, I don't want to say action hero, sort of a named actor that would maybe bring you into a film. But like you say, he plays a lot of the same characters all the time. But yeah, to be honest, those sorts of films that Dwayne Johnson's in, Ryan Reynolds in, I kind of avoid. They're not my cup of tea normally. Whether they're catered to me or more sort of families, they're not really my sorts of films, but I quite like going back and watching these sort of 80s, 90s films because they're fun and they know they're fun. Yeah, it's just interesting to see how it's evolved over the last, like 20 years.
I was going to say, I think a bigger part of it as well was just Americana. One of the things you mentioned like John Wick then, but I think a big reason John Wick has done so well is because you can tell it's got a lot of its inspiration from Eastern cinema and Eastern style action movies, which they have a big emphasis on ensemble. And I think that's a big thing as well with cinema now is like, yes, you can have big name actors, but a lot of the time it's the ensemble that you want to see. You want to see lots of big names. Whereas I think the idea of the one big name and the one big character, it elevates him, but then it will, by putting him in that film, it would elevate the whole film. I think maybe it's just more of like, I wouldn't say it's selfish, but I think during the 80s and early 90s, America liked having the real life Superman. You know, if you look at pro wrestling, they had Hulk Hogan, and it was always these big macho guys. And now there's lots of different styles, lots of different people. And also like just that expanded universe. People really like the idea of a big, broad universe with multiple faces and multiple personalities. So it's hard to get a one and done action movie these days.
That's a good point as well, actually, is, without diving too deep into that, is the fact that America was almost saying, this is our type of film, like they could market that to the world and say, this is an American film. People will watch this and be like, oh yes, American, like, big, brash explosions, like these specific actors always appear in them. Whereas again, like Japanese cinema, Chinese cinema, they all had their kind of like niches. Whereas again, I suppose since it's been kind of, the world has become smaller, because of the internet and stuff like that. And they've tried to appeal to a wider audience. There's the whole like, we want to appeal to China because they have such a big effect on the box office, and we want to bring in this like crowd and this crowd, and like we want to have more females watching these films because obviously these films are quite like male dominated. So again, some of that is to vary in success, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But I guess these films, as you said, Sarah, are just very of their time, and since they've kind of like branched out so much that it's harder to say like, oh, that's an American movie. Like Hollywood has almost just become global instead of actually being Hollywood. So Chris, what was your reaction when this film was mentioned to you, and what do you think of, like you said, you hadn't watched it in quite a long time, but what are your sort of memories of it mainly?
So the first time I actually saw this movie was when it was on TV, and I must have been in early years of high school. And yeah, it was really fun because it was Stallone and Wesley Snipes, and I'd already seen a lot of Stallone movies at this point, and I'd seen Wesley Snipes in Blade at this point. So I knew that these were two like really good action stars. I thought it was hilarious, and I loved, and I think a lot of the commentary must have gone over my head, but for me, I remember as a teenager being like, oh, imagine being in a world where you can't swear, or you can't like eat chocolate and do all that. God, that sounds. And then, but watching it now, it's funny. Like a lot of it, I was like, okay, that's pretty. I can sort of get that. I can see what they were trying to go for. One of the biggest takeaways I wrote down on my notes. I was like, it's like when she's driving to work, Sandra Bullock's character Huxley, and she's like, "Oh God, it's so boring." And I was like, "Why are you moaning? It looks so gorgeous. The city looks amazing. Everything looks so peaceful." And obviously, like a lack of swear, getting fined for swearing is it's funny because I think I initially thought rewatching this film, ooh, are they sort of conflating PC culture with fascism? Because I know there's a lot of, it's one of the big themes that I think this film gets brought up a lot. You see it always brought up as a film that you wouldn't have believed it at the time, early 90s film predicting the future. But I think I was sort of worried coming out of it being like, oh, is this, are people thinking that this is a film that's like an attack on PC culture? But it's like, no, it's not. It's as the film progressed, I actually realized, okay, this is actually quite clever in certain places. Some of it is a bit silly, and I think one of the film's strengths is that it commits to the silliness. This is definitely a film that commits to being this wild, over-the-top action movie, and also definitely the inspiration for Austin Powers. That was that opening scene where he's being frozen. I was like, that's where they got it from, because it's almost identical. It's really funny, actually. I was pleasantly surprised with my second viewing of this through older eyes and through the different optics of time. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I was weirdly reminded, you saying about Austin Powers, Bob Gunton's character, the chief of police, when he weirdly reminded me of Robert De Niro, is it, in Rocky and Bullwinkle? He's playing is it like Supreme Leader or something like that? Is like the villain in it. It's something about that look with the glasses and like the bald head. Maybe, I suppose people could say like Dr. No or something like that. But he just really, I expected him to like do that like bit that's become famous from Rocky and Bullwinkle, where he's just like, "Are you talking to me?" Which is referencing the taxi driver moment.
He did look very intense with his egg head.
Sarah, what was your first thoughts when I said this was the film we were watching? Because like you said, you don't have as much of a history with this, or maybe at all, because you had never seen it before.
When you first mentioned it, I had no idea what to expect. Didn't know who was in it, never heard of it in my life. And then I watched the trailer, and this really 90s cheesy trailer. I was like, okay, I'm in for a treat. It's two big stars. And then, yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I went in with a really open mindset, I think, and that helps. Like, you could really go off and be like, oh, I'm really going to analyse the cinematography, blah, 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 blah. But if you just enjoy it for what it is, like, I think I watched it in a good mood. I really enjoyed it. Like, I know Chris mentioned earlier about like the dialogue and stuff. It's so bad, it's good. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. There's a few things I had to look up afterwards and sort of like, oh, actually, like you say, it's a lot more clever than I guess it initially seems. But yeah, it's definitely got a lot to say, maybe sort of at the time in terms of like political commentary and things like that. But yeah, I actually had a good time with it.
I feel like I'm just gearing myself up to be like the absolute buzzkill in this episode. Just a heads up for everyone.
I think I expected that. I was like, we're going down a Van Helsing route again, of this movie, which I expected from Craig. I knew that would happen.
As an aside, why did you think that I wouldn't like this film?
Just because, again, it encapsulates so much of what we discussed before, like Mortal Kombat, Van Helsing. It just really seemed like a kind of like what Chris and Sarah were talking about there. Like, it's so goofy and silly, and you either can go like one way or another with it. And it just didn't seem like your vibe of silly. It seemed like the more like irritating silly for you.
Okay. You've partly hit it. I don't think you've hit anywhere near my issue with this film.
Okay. I think that, not that I'm saying this like would have changed your like view of the film, but I think Sarah saying about the trailer there, it did help me, for instance. Like, so like when I watched it, I already knew, okay, like 90s action vibes is going to be like science fiction, but I was expecting, again, maybe more of a kind of realistic approach, or just more of a, Terminator kind of like soft sci-fi maybe. But the fact that the trailer was, as you said, Sarah, so like, like in a world, and, like the fact that it's just like, Stallone, like one man will do this, and I was just like, okay. And the fact that even in the trailer, they're like gearing up some of these jokes, and like that one character, I think in the trailer says like, like, we can't fight this guy, we're the police. And it's just like, you were like, okay, right. It already was hitting on that like definite mood that's going for, and it's such a strange mix of emotions. So that's why I was interested if Craig had seen it, because going in blind into that, I was just like, that would be quite a like shock to the system kind of thing. But again, I don't know if watching the trailer would help that or not. No, but for me, I think I agree with you, with Chris and Sarah. I think I had a really fun time with this. It was so silly and goofy, and I think everyone was on board with that. I think, again, in the past, we have talked about things like Mortal Kombat and Van Helsing, which have varying degrees of like maybe certain actors are on board with it and camping it up, while others are kind of trying to do something serious. It's not pulling it off. I think everyone knew the film that they were making in this instance, but they wanted to do it well, and they kind of wanted to, I don't know, they just kind of like really, they didn't ham it up so much, which, it was cheesy. They were being like very over the top with their performances, but I think there was still an element of seriousness to it. So I think that, the villain, is being very Shakespearean and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of like a Star Wars approach of like over the top, not a kind of like Mortal Kombat, as we said before. And I think that they focus in so much on the kind of like, this is different in the future, this is different, and some of it like is varying effects as to like what's actually funny or what's good. But coming out of films like Multiverse of Madness, in which they're like, oh, this world is just red is go and green is stop, and you're like, that's such a lazy, boring like multiverse. So for this film to actually like genuinely look at like some interesting concepts, granted some are quite predictable or just downright weird, but yeah, I had fun with it. I think with something like this, it's all down to like the villains and the heroes. Stallone, I thought, was fantastic. Wesley Snipes was having a great time, I think, and he's probably one of the big reasons that I enjoyed this film.
I love Wesley Snipes in this movie. I thought he was terrific, and he was definitely having so much fun. I also just love the fact that he's wearing, for the majority of the film, a pair of dungarees. I don't know why, but I just thought that he looked so funny, like a cross between Chucky the Killer Doll and like MC Hammer, like, because even at the beginning of the film, he's wearing like the very 90s checkered jacket with the big shoulder pads. Like, he just looks really colourful and bombastic, and it's really funny because the whole point of the film is that he's been brought out because like he will help deal with this issue, and he's going to cause enough chaos that maybe we can do all this. But there's like no subtlety to him. And it's really funny because, like, you think, well, surely they could isolate him, but it goes into the idea of what the film's trying to say is that the world that they're in is just a little bit too soft. Because, like, that's the thing is, this film is a satire. It doesn't nail it all the time. I can definitely admit that much. But it's just really great that they took these two larger-than-life characters and just dumped them into the squeaky clean utopian future, or should we say dystopian future, of San Angeles. Yeah, Wesley Snipes, he's got some great lines in this.
I love his bleach blonde hair as well.
It's so nice, isn't it? He looks so colourful. Like, I just love the first bit when he swears, and then he gives him the fine, and he just goes, "What?" and just swears back at it, and he's just like, he doesn't care.
Apparently Wesley Snipes hated that hair though, and even like it's inspired other people. I think there was like an NBA player who was just like, yeah, this like inspired my colourful haircut, but Wesley Snipes was not a fan. He got rid of it as soon as he could.
I like it. It's very 90s. It fits in, but then I guess it doesn't then work if you're in the future, because I don't know if people would have bleach blonde hair. But
I think like you said, the costumes and stuff like that kind of stuff does make a difference, and it shows in which they've gone to that extra level of detail of picking, I think, like quite good locations as well, in which you're like, oh, that, is clearly just a street that you've just made up with like a few random sci-fi stuff. I think they picked quite effective locations to make it seem like it was the future. And I think that there was enough sort of set dressing and stuff, and the visual effects, I guess, to some way, was very, again, of that era in which they're like, everything is metal and steel and like zapping electricity, so the graffiti thing, it's like, that was just so like 90s, but like 90s expectations of the future. Again, it's like everything's electric and static and like metal, so I think that was really telling. And I think even like the costumes, I think their uniforms that they wear are quite cool. Like, I think when Stallone is like running around, I'm like, he looks pretty threatening. I think like, he looks pretty damn good. Like the beret is obviously a bit cheesy, but he is wearing like the police, garb at the sort of later part of the film. But yeah, I agree, Chris. I think the Wesley Snipes is it's typical kind of like dystopian future stuff, isn't it? By the end, especially because even though at first he's wearing this kind of like 80s, like 90s crazy, gangster kind of outfit. Later, when he has the more like futuristic stuff, and it just looks like somebody's taken like parts of like vacuum cleaners and what were the people called who were like the scrabs or something? Was it the like sewer
Do you mean
people
the
basically?
Oh yeah,
the scraps, scrabs. Like the way that they were dressed and stuff like that. I was like, yeah, you immediately know who these guys are. It's very Mad Max vibes as soon as you see them.
I still can't work out those 3 seashells are for.
Apparently Sandra Bullock did like allude to what it could be, and I was like kind of reading it being like, no, I don't want to know. I was like, this, it kind of like sounded a bit gross, so and I didn't know how like legitimate that was, but yeah, it was bizarre.
What can I say? The film decided not to elaborate on that. Can I just ask a question for the room, because I feel like this is probably affecting sort of my view of the film, and I think it's something that both Chris and Sarah have said. I just wanted to sort of elaborate on. When you say that the film is doing something very clever with its sort of approach to satire, what exactly... I'm trying to say this in a way which doesn't make me sound pretentious. What exactly do you mean by that? Like, what exactly is the film doing?
I think it is sort of going... well, this is where I think the satire doesn't always work. It's the idea of a world that's so obsessed with peace that it doesn't, it can't handle certain things. But I think because when I was watching the film, I was like, oh, I don't think this film's getting it right. Like, I don't think it's nailing this, because like the idea that everyone's too soft to handle crime, like the bit I've got here where the 187, the first MDK happens, and no one even recognizes that number. I was like, right, well, that's bollocks. That's stupid. You would know what that means, even if you've not had one since 2010. Like that which was 22 years ago at this point in the film. So I thought that's silly. But I think where the film sort of gets it wrong or where the film sort of nails it right, is that the guy who's set up this whole thing turns out to be the villain, the mastermind behind it all. So he's manipulating society to do what he wants. Again, I don't think it nails it. I think one of the biggest problem that the film has is that it gets its messagings mixed up quite a lot throughout. But I do like the idea of, because for me, I liked the idea of him getting a hardened criminal from the past to come and stir up some trouble, because there's already trouble brewing underground. Yeah, and he's got somebody that he's like, I don't like this guy. I want to like get rid of him because he's like affecting my utopia kind of thing. So it's a very sort of narcissistic, selfish kind of approach to it. That needed to be embellished more. That underworld and that guy as a terrorist leader. That's where I think it doesn't... Its messaging could have been a lot clearer if you had this guy and you had more of the media portraying him as this negative person, and then by the time you finally meet him you realize, I can see where you're coming from now. It's one of those things where I think that they were onto something pretty good, but they didn't quite stick the landing all the time. But one of the things that I think is the strength of the film is that it does commit to being a silly movie. It reminded me a lot of Idiocracy. Something that reminds me a lot of, if like a modern example, is Hunger Games, in which again that kind of goes for the same look of like, what if like people took this idea of like luxury and idealism to an extreme, and there it's very much showing, like they go to parties and it's just like, oh, you too full, like just drink this drink and then you just throw it all up, and like then you can just keep eating, and it's very much going for like, yes, these are greedy, like self-indulgent people, and they show the other side with the rebels being like, these are the ideal people. These are the people who are downtrodden. This film doesn't show the scraps effectively enough to say this is actually what we should be aiming for. There's some fun stuff with them and you see that they're nice people, but it doesn't really make it clear that they're actually sort of like trodden on in a way. They kind of like have this weird balance of being like, they are criminals, but they aren't too bad, so I think that could have been clearer. Sure. But the reason I don't think that comparison with Hunger Games is sort of my issue with the film here is because the message of what they're going for in the Hunger Games comparison is just
yeah, look at how far these people are willing to go to continue to oppress the lower classes and to maintain their power, right? And just all for frivolous greed. I think that's quite easy to get on board with. My issue here is that a lot of the messaging, and it seems to be this idea of just, oh, everyone is... And I do get this reading, even if they're trying to, like, not do it. I do get this reading of, oh, everyone is too soft, including the police not having enough power and violence to do things. Maybe the police should be more violent. So, funnily enough, I really don't like that as an idea. And I think that there are going to be lots of people, if they were to just come across this film now, would literally just go, yeah, maybe the police, you know, being a bit brutal is a bit effective. Whereas I also just don't understand how they show any form of, like, authoritarian control in this world, apart from, like, really, really... It's one of those films where, you know, where I have this issue a lot, David, where if I just don't get on board with the initial premise, I just don't get on board with the rest of the film. I cannot get on board with a film which is so totalitarian that they would literally fine people for swearing and for having general negative thoughts to the point of making everyone sound like a robot, but is also so soft that if people commit crimes, they can't do anything about it. That doesn't make sense to me, and that's where I think a lot of this messaging of, well, maybe this is what society should be, specifically with this force, does sort of rub me up the wrong way. If, like, there was just, even if there was just like a secret sort of brutal police force that actually enforces these things, I think a lot of the messaging would come off clearer. But the fact that you literally have these police officers saying things like, there's been a murder-death kill. What the hell is that?
Yeah.
And it's not a case of, for me, it's not a case of the silliness. It just comes off as babyish. And I think that's where, like, it sort of really rubs me up the wrong way.
I think for me, and I don't know if Sarah will agree here, because obviously, again, you mentioned the kind of, like, approach and how they, you know, do it in a clever way. I think Stallone is, like, a massive part about why it works, because you've got somebody who's condemning what they're doing throughout the entire thing. So he's like, this is dumb, this is stupid. So I don't feel that they ever are like, yeah, this is great. Or it's like our heroes are kind of encapsulating this, because Sandra Bullock, for example, kind of wants to, like, break out of this. She's like, you know, like, I want to be in the real world. She's kind of like a Disney princess of, like, yeah, it's not healthy to live in this way. And I think the fact that then he's, like, mocking things like the swearing and stuff like that. But when I mentioned, I think this film to somebody, in which I said, you know, this is in the next episode, somebody said something similar of like, oh, that hasn't aged well in terms of, like, their commentary on the police. But at the same time, if you know, like, I think what you said earlier, Chris, is that the political commentary it's going for, I don't think is too, like, it's quite on the nose, like, on surface, but I never felt I was being preached to, for example. I never felt that they were like, this is bad, like, or like, look how goofy this is. I think that they do have, like, a balance in some ways of, like, good and, you know, pros and cons. But I think, you know, like what you were saying there, Craig, about, like, you know, like, yeah, violence is a good thing, but if you look at the other side of it, you could also see the messaging as what happens when you over-police people, you know, so that a scene where they're going up to Wesley Snipes and they're like, you know, like, approach person, do this, do that. And, you know, in my mind, I couldn't help but think, like, oh, imagine if that computer was saying, like, you know, put knee on neck, which I know is quite a grim, you know, comparison to make there. But, you know, I think it is something that it is alluding to, of, like, the idea of over-policing, and also that these criminals are, like, not salvageable, that they need to literally be reprogrammed. And they're saying that these scraps and stuff, like, oh, they're just, like, lost. Like, society is only, like, good if, like, everyone is obeying the rules and everyone does exactly as we say. And Sylvester Stallone's character is kind of there to be like, no, that's not what life is about. And, like, you are over-policing yourself. And that's why him as the Demolition Man, like, I come in and blow things up, is kind of like the best kind of juxtaposition to that.
Yeah, but the rules they're following are just so ineffective, because they are literally just, like, issue threat with no, like, backup of anything. That's why I just don't think it works like that. So I agree with your friend. I just don't think it's aged well.
Yeah, but I kind of think that's the point, is just the fact that they're like, here's form that tells you what you've done. But Sarah, what do you think? There's reams of stuff there to discuss.
I guess I'm going to be, you know, sort of contextual sort of person, I guess. Or when I looked this up, I guess I realised that it was It came out the year after the LA riots, which I guess is sort of like around the area of what we're talking about. So it would have been filmed, I guess, in the same sort of year that happened. Which, yeah, like you say, Craig, kind of it's that police abuse of power, I guess, and then kind of flipping it, but then asking them to use more force. I don't know. It's a toughie, and then I guess, yeah, and then I don't know if you were going to allude to this later, David, but obviously it's based on A Brave New World, which is this sort of dystopian, sort of futuristic novel, which is very loose. I've read the book. It's like, yeah, I can see some parallels, but it's not a carbon copy. I guess I think it's clever in the sense that I think some of the social commentary, more in the sort of comedic aspect, I agree. Now looking back on it, maybe the police aspect doesn't hold up. I completely agree with that part, but for me, the bits I take away are the dialogue, the scripts. That's what I enjoyed. It's not perfect. I am very much aware of that. But yeah, I just think maybe the context of when it's happening, I guess it maybe might help with that sort of situation.
I will just be clear. I give Stallone and I give Wesley Snipes massive credit for the performances. If only for Wesley Snipes, because he is basically just doing a very good sort of modern Joker sort of performance. The rest, because of the way in which their world is constructed, just it's a bit too alien for me. Like I think some of the sort of contextualization of the world, like the sort of weird greeting of "Be well," I think does a good job of showing, like, you know, just how sort of like inhuman this society has become. Some of the things that Bullock does in this film, I'm just like, what are you doing?
She's very frustrating.
The entire sex scene, I was just like, why has this been included?
Yeah, that sex scene. This film should have an epilepsy warning. Like, Jesus Christ, my eyes were etched with that scene. Not from just how weird it was, but just the lights are like, I was watching in a dark room, granted, but I was like, my God, I could still see that for like 10 minutes afterwards.
Yeah, it was so loud as well. Like, it was just, there was the screeches and like the shocking things you'd have. Like, if I was wearing headphones, I would have probably had a really bad headache coming out of that scene. It was... I think, to Craig's point, though, it's where I sort of think, like, considering how silly some of the people were in the police station, I think the film needed to be a little bit sillier with its... It sounds weird, but, like, if you have a premise as this, which is this silly, go even further with it, which is why I think the dialogue and Wesley Snipes' character is so over the top. But I do agree that some of the way they portray, like, the police in this, it's a bit too dumb. I think... For me, the one of the best ones was the fine for swearing. I think that's pretty clever. I do think the police needed to be a lot better than they were. They didn't need to be that inept. Or, as you mentioned, like there should have been like there should have been different levels of police, like a secret police, like an actual proper secret police, which would have been really interesting to see. And it's why I liked the fact that was it Dr. Cocteau?
Dr. Raymond Cocteau. Yes. Sounds like a cocktail. Like, can I have a Dr. Cocteau, please?
Yeah, can I get a Dr. Cocteau? It's just an empty glass. But like, I liked the idea of him bringing in a hardened criminal just to try and prove his point. But it's sort of where the film sort of failed, is we needed to see more of the scraps. We needed to see more of that underworld. The biggest thing I enjoyed about this film is because it's very campy and it's very silly. But I can totally appreciate a lot of the dissonance that's created with some of the commentary in the film.
Yeah, I think that saves it for me is, again, the campiness, the silliness, but also, like you said, elements like the fine-in thing. What I appreciated about that is that maybe today they would be like, that's too distracting. You can't have like a voice talking over people every single time, because every time it happens, it's saying it in the background. It's going like, you have been fined. And I just kind of like that. As it made me feel like, it's like a video game or something like that. It seemed like something that would happen, when you get like trucks and stuff, which are like vehicle reversing and things like that. It just seemed like of that age in which we've like over digitalized stuff. We got things like Siri and all that kind of thing. So I liked that it was just the aesthetic of the film. I think that like the police headquarters, I thought that looked like really convincing. It looked quite effective. The sets, that idea of like all these posh voices added to the fact that like this Cocteau guy is the villain, and all these like robot voices you hear are usually like posh English voices, which kind of adds to the fact that it's all like run by aristocrats and stuff like that. So I think that, I enjoyed that as a kind of technical element, that every time you could hear it there in the background. So even when characters were swearing so heavily, you would hear it every single time. Sarah, was there gags and fun visuals and stuff? We mentioned Wesley Snipes earlier that sort of stood out for you.
I guess I kind of really enjoyed the sort of self-awareness of it. Like I remember them dropping like Schwarzenegger's name. There was even a line, I wrote it down, it says, "Excuse me, Rambo, I need to borrow this." You're like, this film is so meta. Yeah, I love those little things, like a Lethal Weapon poster, and I just I like those little things. I like self-aware things. It was almost verging on like parody. It was when those things came up, which I don't know, I kind of liked it. But yeah, I thought it was funny. I'm surprised no one's mentioned it, but the whole Taco Bell gag.
Oh, yeah.
Like the advertising of Taco
and
Bell.
I love the idea of like the fast food wars or something like that. I was like,
yeah,
I want to see
that film.
I wanted to go down to the scraps and see the McDonald's staff, or like Ronald McDonald there, like, "I've been banished,"
Yeah, and the Hamburglar, just like worse for wear.
Interestingly, again, this isn't in the facts, so something I saw, apparently in other countries where Taco Bell doesn't exist, it was changed for like Pizza Hut and stuff like that. So country dependent on who won the franchise was.
Yeah, it's international, because that's the thing, like, I don't know the scale of this film, because obviously they're saying it's this one small city, but is the rest of the world like this? I don't know.
This is definitely a film that knows exactly what it's doing. And like the references, referencing Rambo, referencing Schwarzenegger, they're all and obviously this was in 1993, so we'd already had a good 10 years of 80s action movies at this point. So I think this was definitely the self-aware era of action, where it was like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hey, remember that thing, and which can be quite tiresome, but it's quite sweet for this movie, I thought.
And I think what pulls off, again, this like silliness for me is, again, moments in the script is some of that like witty dialogue. Like for me, the scene, somebody who I've, like even the professor at the start, I think he's been like in quite a lot of like British like productions and stuff. I think he's also the voice of the father in Disney's Tarzan, interestingly. But again, just the way that entire like scene plays out, in which he's such a like elaborate like cartoon scientist of like, oh, we're going to like extract this man, and so you already get cartoon vibes from seeing this character, which again gives me kind of like Sam Raimi vibes almost in a way. And then Bob Gunton as the chief, again, I just thought his line when he said Mr. Phoenix has risen from the ashes, and we need to like bring him down with the Demolition Man. There's so many times in which they were like Shakespearean and theatrical, and I just loved like the presence that he had and the lines that they sort of delivered with such seriousness, which I just thought was quite effective and quite funny. I guess the silly moments that stood out to me in terms of the gags, which worked. One was like the screens, like when they're turning around and like they're constantly just that awkward like metal box, which again is kind of like almost like what we're doing now, like Zoom in a way. And then the knitting gag, it's silly, but like just the idea that they were like, you get reprogrammed to like do something else in society, and you're like, okay, I understand why they were doing this process now, because they don't make that, like you said, Chris, earlier, there's some things that they like. There's the whole thing of like rule of three, say it 3 times so you remember. They just say like, oh, these people are going into things, they'll be reprogrammed. And you're like, why are they being cryogenically frozen? But it's made clearer once Sandra Bullock makes that clear about how they changed their skill set and stuff. And I think the way that they played with the knitting the jumper thing, I was like, this was done, I think, well. I think they could have made it really corny. It could have been something like, oh, I know knitting, and they could have been using the jumper at the end as a weapon or something stupid like that. But I thought that they managed to rein it in enough that Stallone was just there like, seriously, what the hell? And again, it was that parody element that, almost that the film knew what it was doing, and Stallone was almost reacting to the plot of the film himself.
I'll say this as well. I love the gun sound effects. I loved that they were crunchy gun sound effects, big bang. Because I was talking about this the other day with like remasters of films, and like they're trying to make guns sound more authentic and realistic. And I'm like, it's just not the same. I want my gun to sound like you're literally causing a supernova. It's only a pistol, but it's a powerful pistol. And this film's great, like when they're shooting stuff, and then when he's just walking around the Hall of Violence, which is a fantastic name for a section of a museum. But whenever he fires a gun, it's loud, and it needed to be loud as well because it just sort of added to the film. I've just realized something as well about this movie, and what this film is. This is Stallone's last action hero. Which is like you realize, like Last Action Hero is like the sort of the self-aware movie within the movie, action hero within the movie sort of thing, and I think that's what this was trying. They both came out the same year as well, and they both Arnie and Stallone reference each other in those films, in their respective films, and I feel like this was sort of another attempt at like that sort of, because again it's the self-aware action hero movie. And that's definitely something that I'm starting to realize now that I think about it. It's like, that's what they were going for. They're sort of the self-aware action movie. I think that was the sort of where they wanted the genre to go, is acknowledging how silly it is, acknowledging it, but also still enjoying it as you go along. And that's probably what I think is why this film is done so well, is that it is still very fun. Great action sequences, great dialogue, and... yeah, well, there's a lot of issues with the satire itself. This movie nails being an action movie because it's not boring at all.
And I think like the gun aspect in terms of like Wesley Snipes' character is quite fun. That he's like, ooh, I've got old guns to play with, but then there's this futuristic gun, and it's like you said, Chris. It's like this isn't just a laser. This is like it's so loud when it happens. So the only thing that sort of pissed me off with. We were talking about like that is silly, that wouldn't happen. I was like, as soon as he walked into that museum, I was like, please don't tell me they're loaded, please don't say there's ammo in there, and there is. And I'm like, why would a museum, like even the most like utopian of society, put loaded weapons into a museum?
It's worse than that. It's not just a case of they're loaded with like a single round. They seem to have multiple rounds in. Like how much is he shooting just like random dummies until eventually he has to like go to reload a gun? Take those cassettes, rewind them, and play them again, because it's VHS Corner. I thought that David did such a good job last time that I've asked him to do it again, so he's going to be walking us through some of the behind-the-scenes trivia of this film, so take it away, David.
So I'll start off with, again, a crazy link to last time we were talking about Rush Hour, and somebody who's mentioned in this film. Sylvester Stallone wanted Simon Phoenix to be played by Jackie Chan. Chan declined the offer since Asian audiences give negative feedback on the idea of action stars from either Hong Kong or Hollywood who have always played heroes who would all of a sudden become typecasted as villains. Also, when we're talking about like the filming of this, apparently Sylvester Stallone described the cryogenic freezing scene as probably the worst 5 hours I've ever had on movie sets. I was terrified, is the quote. And I'm not surprised, because the one thing that made me laugh about that is when he has to awkwardly crouch into the tube, which just made me laugh so much. Then in terms, talking again about Stallone, we've talked about the reception to this film. Sylvester Stallone is on record as being pleased with the movie, calling it a good action film ahead of its time. So touching on what we've mentioned there, was it, is it a fun action movie? Did they predict a lot of stuff? When we're talking about the futuristic stuff, this is where the seashells comes in, and this is just such a predictable, mundane reason that this was in here that I had to throw it in. So according to screenwriter Daniel Waters, the inspiration for the 3 shells came about when he was writing a scene where Spartan has to use a restroom. He was trying to come up with futuristic things you'd find in there. He was having trouble, so he called a buddy, another screenwriter across town, and asked him if he had any ideas. Coincidentally enough, that person was in the bathroom when he answered the phone, looked around the bathroom and said, I have a bag of seashells on the toilet as a decoration. And Walter says, okay, I'll make something out of that. So, yeah, it literally was as literal as that, which I did think when I was watching that scene. I was like, is this to do with seashells as decorations? But yeah, that was the inspiration. During filming, Rob Schneider became friends with Sandra Bullock, but had reservations about her next project, some bus movie that he didn't think would take off. That film turned out to be Speed from 1994, which was one of next year's most critically and financially successful movies, which I love the idea of some bus movie, or as many Simpsons fans will know it, the bus that wouldn't slow down. I'm glad that I'm glad that I was right in thinking this. This actually has a first for Jack Black. He had an early role as one of the Wasteland Scraps. You can see him in like some of the action scenes. Like he's very, very in the background. But when I saw him, I was like, is that Jack Black? So once I read this, I was glad I felt, correct in my spot of him there. Previously mentioned about how the film has changed in different territories with the Taco Bell aspect. But interestingly, we were talking about how this film is so similar to other action movies, especially Stallone, Schwarzenegger films. Well, in Kuwait, the renamed Arabic title was actually Rambo the Destroyer, since both Conan the Destroyer and Rambo First Blood Part 2 were action-packed blockbusters from Hollywood since the mid-1980s. The distributor thought associating Sylvester Stallone to Rambo in the title will sell more tickets due to the popularity of both films in the United Arab Emirates nation, despite the movie having nothing to do with the Rambo and Conan franchises. So we talked a lot there about like how to sell a movie and stuff like that. They literally were just like, imagine if they did that now, just be like, oh, like Batman, the beginning or something. And it's like, this isn't anything to do with Batman. So, yeah, that one I thought was quite fun.
I kind of do want to see a Rambo time travel movie, though.
Just people watching it be like, is this Rambo? Is this like, yeah, sure, why not? But yeah, thoughts on some of those facts? Chris, obviously you were laughing at one particular fact there.
The some bus movie just got me really.
That just solidified to me that yet again Rob Schneider doesn't know what he's talking about. Also, fun fact, no matter how many cast lists I look at, Rob Schneider is not credited anywhere for this film. And I'm just like, why?
That's true, yeah.
This is probably one of your less I want to punch you in the face sort of films. Even if you do have that really stupid, unnecessary, obnoxious laugh when he said he doesn't know how to use the seashells.
Yeah. Craig doesn't like Rob Schneider, if you couldn't.
Most sensible people don't like Rob Schneider.
No, I don't like him.
Correct.
Do you think he pissed off someone on the crew and they thought, let's just get his name off this damn movie?
I find it interesting as well that Glenn Shadix is in this, because we recently talked about Beetlejuice and the fact that this is, quite near to that. And again, he's playing like the same character in a lot of ways. It's just like, yep, that was his shtick. That's what he did. Like come in and play this kind of like pompous, like advisor. It's just funny how, again, same role every time. And such near to each other films.
And also very similar hairstyles.
Sarah, was there anything that stuck out to you there?
I guess it's quite interesting what you said about the change of titles. And I guess it goes back to what we were saying earlier about how these actors would bring in people to the cinema. There were names. So obviously it did have an international reach. Yes, they changed the title, manipulated the audience. Who doesn't? But yeah, I guess it's just solidifying what we said earlier about the sort of influence back then. I don't know.
Especially
if that would
combining them. I love that aspect because it kind of like what we were talking earlier about action figures. Another one I read was that apparently there was a Demolition Man action figure, but it was just a repainted He-Man. So it's kind of like, again, just recycle it all, just repaint it,
I gotta say, I love Jackie Chan as an actor. I genuinely think the film would be unbearable if he were the villain. I cannot see a world where he pulls off the same sort of manic energy, sort of quippiness.
Especially because we were saying previously about like, his native language isn't English, and the fact that Wesley Snipes is like speaks Spanish at certain points in this film, it would have even be even harder to understand what was going on. So I think the charisma of Snipes really again embraces, because it's from the get-go, like as soon as you see that character, you're like, oh wow, this is a choice. The fact that what he's going for, he doesn't like kind of build up to it. He's like, no, he is crazy man from the beginning. And even the fact, like, when it's like listing the crimes, because even someone like Joker, who, you've got a film like Todd Phillips' Joker, in which you're like, should I be supporting this character? He's doing horrible things. But, again, I somewhat agree with maybe some of the, reasons he's doing it, etc. But this film, in which they were just like, here's the list of crimes, it's just like the first one, rape, and you were like, oh god, like I feel bad about like enjoying the campiness of this villain now. The fact that you've like pinpointed that is one of the main crimes that he did, you were like, oh god.
Yeah, David, you suck.
Yeah, Yeah, it really does sort of take the oomph out of the colourful character, doesn't it? And you're like, oh, no. Yeah, and also there's a bit where he's just openly racist.
Yeah, which again, theme of the 90s.
Yeah, just openly racist, and it's like, it's like, that's not cool. I mean, obviously, like he's a in an action movie. It's weird that sort of this where you're like, oh yeah, I don't mind him like causing explosions and blowing up government property, but dude, come on, don't do that.
Exactly. So
it's like you've crossed the line now.
Moving on then, so we'll wrap it up now with, as we said earlier, our usual task of deciding whether today's film deserves a place in our movie vault. So for new listeners or guests, we like to think of this as a cryogenically frozen capsule of films, good and sometimes bad, that should be remembered for someone to dig up in the future. So maybe it deserves its fame, maybe it's been forgotten, or maybe it's just great but just doesn't quite fit the bill. So should Demolition Man gain the honour of a place in our movie vault and be remembered for all time? I think I know Craig's answer to this, so maybe we'll get that out of the way.
Yeah, no thanks. I'm gonna be watching these answers like a hawk, by the way.
I don't know whether I should make this more tricky for the guests or kind of like, but I guess the fact that, I don't know. Yeah, I gotta do it. So I'm gonna say I think it should, because it's so campy and fun. I think that it's silly, it's entertaining, and I think in some ways Stallone was right. Maybe it was ahead of its time, and like we've said, maybe now if it was made, they would have adjusted those kind of like commentary. They would have said like, oh, let's make it clear what we're saying. It's hard to say like whether, you know, the standpoint that they're taking. Personally, I don't feel that they're taking one side, but, you know, I guess that comes down to like even, you know, most stories in which would you take that? It's kind of like war films. A lot of people will say like, you know, well, I don't think that you should be glorifying war or something like that. But aside from all of that, I think there's just, it knows so much what it is. I think that, as we've said, it's kind of embraced the legacy of these films by having like references to other ones. There's so many great actors in this. There's a lot of like memorable lines and moments. I think it's silly and fun, and I think it would be like a fun addition to the movie vault. So I've created this divide for you now, guys. So good luck untangling that. Chris, what do you think?
It's tough because again, like I thought I was going to enjoy this a lot less when I saw it again.
Same.
And while I can quite clearly pick holes in it and make a lot of commentary about and all the problems about it, I could do that for a lot of movies. If I go back to the 90s and the 80s, I could do that for quite a lot of films, and it would be quite easy to do, I think, because things are products of their time, and when that doesn't excuse some of that stuff that might have happened that I could disagree with, it is something that I can always do. But I will say, like, I do think Demolition Man should go in the vault. While I don't think it nailed the satire, I think it wasn't a bad satire. While I do think some of its commentary might be a bit messy, I think it was clever at the time to have an action movie be this self-aware. Because action movies were never this self-aware, in my opinion, particularly with the subject matter they're going with. Again, other films have done this style of filmmaking far better than this, but I do think this film should be in the vault. Even just from the fact that as one of Stallone's many action films he's done, this is definitely one of the best. That isn't Rambo or I was going to say Judge Dredd. No, I think this should go in the vault.
Also, the interesting legacy of characters from the 90s who get like turned to ice and smashed, because like when I saw the ending to this, like spoilers, like Wesley Snipes, you know, like gets frozen and like his head gets smashed in, I was like, oh, maybe I have seen this, because when I was young, I have a specific image, like you, Chris, of watching a film on TV with my cousins and being like, I shouldn't be watching this is too violent. And I can never remember what it was, and I thought it was Terminator 2 years later, because that happens in that film. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you see a head specifically smashed. It's more just the entire body. So I was like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, maybe it was this film that I actually saw. But it just makes me laugh. There's so many, like, the logic of like, yes, if you freeze metal, it just shatters. And you're like, okay.
Yeah. The ice is the physics of the ice in movies is very interesting. It's all Mortal Kombat physics.
Sarah, I could see you really deliberating in your brain there. I would say it's like down to you, but again, I suppose you could give it a draw vote, which, you know, like would be, I think I would know where I would go if that is the decision. But what do you think?
Yeah, it's not obvious. It's not, you know, it's it's like we've all touched upon. It's not perfect, but it's fun. I can enjoy it for what it is. You've mentioned things like Van Helsing and things like this, which were earlier down. But have you got anything this fun in the vault? I'm not so sure. Something you could just kick back, relax for 2 hours, and enjoy. But it's. I don't
David,
know.
can you send a list of what's in the vault? Because I think there are definitely things that are actively fun in the vault.
I'm trying to see it. Well, we got things like Volcano, which is a disaster film. We've got Mortal Kombat. We've got Excalibur, which is a very goofy kind of like medieval film. We've got films like Snatch. We've got any other sort of similar ones. I don't know. That's what I mean. I think it does encapsulate that kind of like 80s, 90s action, which I don't think we've had. We've had fun films, but I don't think that we've had like action hero, as we said, movie. And it's interesting because Chris mentioned, like you said, would there be better candidates? Possibly, probably. But I don't know. I just feel that it still comes down to the fact that it's like, I had fun. It is really good. I think that like it's interesting to kind of like look. It's brought about so many questions on this episode. I think it's interesting in that point of view. Craig disagrees.
No, I mean, like I said, I think part of the messaging is actively harmful. But hey ho, like
it's interesting to look back on and see how we've evolved, how we've changed, especially maybe with the LA riots element that Sarah brought in.
To Craig's point, though, I think the film tries to address that itself, but it doesn't. Again, like even the ending of the film, what is it he just says? Just meet in the middle. It's kind of like the film is trying to send the message that totalitarianism is bad, but I think its perspective of what totalitarianism is doesn't really mesh well.
There's also just the fact that the film, again, it just ends. It's like that Sopranos thing or whatever. It's just like, he's living in the future now? He's happy? Like, what's going on?
Do I want it to go in? Yeah, sure. You can have fun in there.
Sorry, Craig. So if, not to make Sarah feel bad, but if it had gone tie, I think I would have said no on the sense that there wasn't a consensus. But I think on the basis the three people have said that they had a fun time, it should go in for that. Sorry, Craig, but it's another addition to the movie vault that is a bit of a problematic one or campy, silly one that maybe wasn't enjoyed. So yeah, into the movie vault goes Demolition Man. Do you agree at home? Let us know. Continue the debate. I'm sure it'll cause a lot of conversation.
We're in the end game now.
It's so annoying.
Okay, endgame time. So this is a game simply called Post Alone. I want to focus specifically on Sylvester Stallone as a person, mainly because if I think more about this film, I genuinely want to kill myself. He's a very likable man. I think it's very worthwhile saying that because not only does he have a lot of film roles where, outside of the action persona, he does play the sort of rising up from nothing sort of characters, and very much fighting against impossible odds. He has a lot of inspirational quotes. He's often quoted in interviews of saying relatively insightful things. And that's basically going to be the idea of this game. What I've done is I've taken a load of quotes that are from him himself, and I've mixed them in with quotes of his in various films. And by various films, I potentially mean the Rocky and the Rambo film franchise. It is going to be your job to try and guess, quickfire, whether it's a quote that he said or a quote from his films. So the way this will work is basically I'll read out a quote. I want you to buzz in, and by that I mean just say me or just indicate you want to answer. If you get it right, you get a point. If you get it wrong, your opponent gets the point.
Oh.
So
I could just be safe and just say nothing.
You could. That would, this audio podcast would be relatively dead in the water if you were to do that. What I might do is I'll probably put in a 20-second sort of timer. If you haven't answered in that time, it's just null and void. But before that, we need to see what it is that we'd be playing for. So, as always, the winner of this endgame will get to choose from a number of films what gets discussed in next week's episode. Those films will be provided by the two of you as well as David. So, David, What potential car wreck of a film do you want us to discuss for next time?
How do you know it's a car wreck?
Because your taste in films at this point, David.
So I have gone for a film from 2015. It's staying down the genre of science fiction, and my connecting sort of idea here is that this film deals with a lot of kind of lore and ideas, this thing of the swearing, etc. So this film is something that sort of suffers for that. I think that this is where we've had fun with this, and it's kind of like being 50-50. This film was very negatively received, but, it's an interesting one to watch in terms of why it fails. It's also got the interesting element of a Oscar-winning actor who also is a Razzie-winning actor. And I'll give you a quote from one of the interviews after which is my character had his larynx ripped out by a wolf man. And so I made the bold choice, which I thought was right at the time, to talk like that for the entire film. That is my choice.
Okay, so I already know what this is. So, David's film from 2015. Chris, what do you have for us?
I have a film from 1987, and it's continuing the themes of dystopia, satire, big meaty men slapping meat, and Jesse the Body Ventura.
An interesting combination. Excellent. And finally, Sarah, what would you like us to have?
So my film is from 2002. And it's very similar in terms of, a few investigative people looking for some criminals. Maybe something that's been invented that could potentially, help or hinder finding this criminal.
I think I also know what yours is. Based on that premise and the film alone, the only one I have literally zero idea of what it is Chris's. A variety of different decades to be looking at. Obviously, the winner of the end game gets to choose one of those 3 films. So you don't have to choose your own. You can choose somebody else's if the premise sounds intriguing enough to you. It is completely your choice. But to get to that honour, you need to win the end game. So, are we ready to play Post Alone?
Yes.
Okay. Your first quote. I'm more focused and have a greater sense of challenge because I constantly feel the weight of time.
Buzz.
Sarah?
Real Stallone. Live Stallone.
So, is it a real life quote? Yes, it is.
Yes. Yes.
Unfortunately, the source I'm using doesn't tell me whether it's an interview or a speech, but that is something that he did say in real life. Quote number 2. Usually, whenever you're scared of something, do it. If you're not afraid of it, don't do it.
Chris.
Yep.
Movie?
Is it a movie? No, it's real life.
Yes.
I would say probably harmful advice because there are some things I'm afraid of doing because of, the consequences.
Yeah.
It just sounds so vague.
Next quote. Love is totally about loyalty. People fade, looks fade, but loyalty never fades.
Chris.
Yep.
That's got to be a movie.
Is it a movie? No, he genuinely said this.
Oh my god.
Is Sylvester Stallone real? What?
Poetry by Stallone.
What can I say? Are we ready for the next quote?
Sure.
The older I get, the more things I gotta leave behind. That's life.
Buzz.
Sarah?
Movie?
Is it a movie? That is a movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't ask me what movie, though.
It's like Expendables or something? Sounds something
No,
like
I
that.
said, it's literally a choice of 2 films. It's either going to be a Rambo or a Rocky quote.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Next up. If I can change and you can change, everybody
Chris,
can change.
Movie.
Is
It's a movie.
Yeah? What movie is it?
It's Rocky 3.
You are correct. It's Rocky 3.
Wow.
No, actually, no. It's Rocky 4. It's the one with Drago.
Next one's going to be tricky because it has a word that would make you think it's one film, but I've told you that film is not quoted in this article at all. So are you ready for the next quote?
Yep.
We're all expendable. We think the world's going to stop when a pope dies or a king, and then life goes on.
Buzz.
Sarah?
Real life. I hope.
Did he say it in real life? Yes, he did.
Ooh.
Was it somebody who was like, we need to ask Stallone's opinion on the latest Pope death or something.
I genuinely don't know what the hell he's been asked in half these films, considering half the films he makes, in these interviews, sorry, because half the films he makes are not that insightful. So why is he talking about these like posters you'd see on mothers' sort of Facebook walls? Like, I don't know.
Stallone reacting to the death of the Queen or something like that.
Next up.
She was a great queen.
Time takes everybody out. Time is undefeated.
Chris, movie. It's gotta be a movie.
Yes, it is indeed a movie.
Yeah.
Next up. Life is an opponent that never stops punching, so you better not stop punching back.
Is it too obvious?
Interesting, because I'm not sure if what Sarah said was a buzz or not.
Chris?
So I don't know if... Because I heard Sarah first, but I don't think
it's Chris.
Chris.
Movie?
No, it's not. It is a life quote.
Oh.
You got tricked.
Yeah, Sarah was just like tactical. They're like, no, it wasn't me. It wasn't me.
It's because so many have been live so far. I was thinking, surely there's got to be more movie quotes in here.
Don't try and metagame like the percentages of what I'd go for, because that might really disappoint you. Right, next quote. Nobody owes nobody nothing.
Chris.
Yep.
Movie.
That is a movie.
Yeah. That's the first Rocky, I'm sure.
That's the only one I've seen, but it was very good.
Yeah. So different to the rest of them.
Next quote. Dreams cost nothing. They are free. The hard part is just keeping them going.
Buzz.
Sarah?
Real life, surely.
He does indeed say that.
Wow.
Because funnily enough, I think that might be out of place in Rambo.
I was going to say, please be in Rambo.
No, it is real life. Okay, and the final quote for this game. Are you ready?
Yeah.
You are what you leave behind.
Chris. Real life.
Surely.
It's real life.
Yay.
And that is the end of Post Alone. So, Post Alone, the scores. Chris, you got 4, but with a very respectable 7. Winning the end game for today, it's Sarah.
Woohoo!
Congratulations.
Yay, well done.
Thank you very much.
You are the next in a nicely growing line of first-time appearer, first-time winners of the end game. How does it feel?
It feels great. I'm not going to come back, so I end on a streak, you know.
Oh, that's a harsh way for David to find out.
I'm always a winner. You never take that away from me.
It's that Rocky mentality, you know.
Yeah, because Rocky famously won one fight and never did anything again.
Yeah. 5 films later.
Just those other films, he's just sat there being like, well, sucks to be you, mate. I'm not fighting you.
That's why she hasn't watched the rest of the Rocky films. She's like, you know what? I'm happy with that.
End on a high.
This is how I'm going to headcanon it. Yeah.
But, of course, Sarah, you are the victor, and to the victor goes the spoils. So you have a choice of 3 films in front of you. So would you like to go with David's film from 2015? Would you like to go with Chris's film from 1987? Or would you like to indeed choose your film? It is completely up to you.
It's a lot of pressure.
It's not really that much pressure in the grand scheme of things.
I have no idea what either film is, to be honest, from David or Chris. We all know what my film is. I think Chris is the most ambiguous. I have no idea what your film is, Chris. So I think I'm going to go with Chris's film.
Okay, so Chris, your film has been selected. So everybody gets something from today, apart from David. So Chris...
Demolition Man made it into the vault.
Oh, shut up. Right. So Chris, tell us a little bit about this film, and then eventually, what is the film you have chosen?
So, as I said, it is a dystopian satire with big meaty men slapping meat and also Jesse Ventura. This is a world where criminals are put to the test in elaborate game shows, televised across the nation. And it was also written as a short story by, what's his name? Richard Bachman, which was the pseudonym for Stephen King. I am, of course, talking about The Running Man.
The Running Man.
Arnold Schwarzenegger is forced into a deadly game on the highest-rated TV show of the future. No one has ever survived. But he has yet to play. Arnold Schwarzenegger is the Running Man. I'll be back. Rated R. Starts Friday at a theater near you.
So we're also now going down a little bit of a rabbit hole of films called Something Man, but not actually being superheroes.
Yes, this is in my opinion, a far better version of satire than The Demolition Man, but also generally a really fun action movie, and it has a lot of very colourful characters and was definitely inspired by the 80s era of American gladiators and professional wrestling. And it's a great watch.
Okay, fantastic. So, David, tell us where, if our viewers wish to watch along at home, can they find it?
Well, as of recording, this is viewable on Now TV and Sky subscriptions. That can often change, as often they do put limited times on those types of films. But also you can rent it on the usual places, Amazon, YouTube, Apple TV, all of those kind of places. And as we also mentioned, you can find it, I'm sure, on physical media, DVD, Blu-ray, that kind of stuff. Go search it out. And yeah, good to have that Schwarzenegger pick in the end. As an additional prize, can we have, Craig, you know the one but last quote? Can you read that again so Chris can say it in his Stallone voice?
I'll type it out in the Zooms.
No pressure, Chris.
No
you
pressure.
already did it, so I was like, we need to hear this.
Dreams cost nothing. They're free. The hard part is keeping them going.
It was like he was in the room.
Amazing.
There you go.
That's great. It seems like something somebody should have tattooed on them.
It does.
It's just like his face.
He probably has it tattooed on himself, doesn't he?
Well, thank you guys for joining us. Congratulations to Sarah for your win there. And thank you for handing over the film choice to Chris as well. So like Craig said, everyone's a winner there. And yeah, thank you for joining us for this discussion of Demolition Man. So where can the people find you? What projects or anything you got coming up which you want to shout about? And yeah, where can people find you on social media, etc.? Chris, where can people find you?
So you can find me as part of my theatre company, Dramatic Moose Productions. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Dramatic Moose Productions. You can find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Dramatic Moose Productions. We're on Twitter at twitter.com/Dramatic_Moose, and the same for our Instagram, Dramatic_Moose. You can also find our website, dramaticmooseprodu.wixsite.com, where you can find information about the team and some of our productions, and some more information about what will be coming up soon, as we're coming out of the pandemic slowly but surely, and we're hoping to do a few more plays. We did some shows last year, and here's hoping that we'll be doing some more this year.
Awesome. Go check them out. It sounds like some fun stuff that could be coming up. Sarah, what about yourself?
I guess the main place that people can check me out is on YouTube under the name Popcorn Chat. I post fairly regularly. If not, I'm pretty much the same name everywhere. It's either Sarah's Popcorn Chat or S Popcorn Chat on Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd. I've definitely got something to say about a film.
And look out for that Rocky deep dive soon.
Yeah, I'm going to watch all of them now.
Or the review, just the first one, and be like, that's it.
Yeah, best film ever.
In, that's where it's ended. All right, thank you for joining us both. It's been a really fun discussion with Demolition Man. We look forward to talking about The Running Man next time. Craig, anything lastly from yourself?
I'm just going to go sulk in the corner.
Okay, well, we'll see how things go next time. And yeah, hopefully Chris is right in that we have a better satire and Craig enjoys it more. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And we hope to see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
To keep up with the latest episodes of Well Good Movies, you can listen to us on all your usual podcast outlets, including Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and rate us where you can to keep our podcast growing. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Well Good Movies to keep up with the latest news and highlights from all our episodes, as well as tell us what movies you want to be discussed in the future. And if all of that isn't enough, you can also find us at our website, freshtakehub.com/wellgoodmovies, where you can catch all our episodes along with videos and articles deep diving into the worlds of film and television. So what are you waiting for? Go check out the film we'll be discussing in next time's episode.